remember the first time I picked up a camera and I was just like, this is confusing. Believe you me, I know it's very daunting the first time you pick up a camera. I mean, the first thing, you don't want to drop it. This is definitely one of the most popular topics for beginners. If you want to take your photography to the next level, you should learn how to shoot in manual. I'm not saying that you can't take great pictures without shooting in full manual. I'm just saying that you're going to be a much better photographer if you understand what all of those numbers and fractions on the back of your camera mean. It's kind of scary, right? This all sounds really complicated to start with, believe me, I know. But once you get going, everything's going to become a lot clearer. The first setting you want to learn how to understand is ISO. The best way to think about ISO is to just think of it as like a volume knob. The higher you turn it up, the more bright your image is going to be. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to take this shot at ISO 100.
It's a little bit dark at ISO 100.
And I'm going to take this shot at ISO 1600.
Turning up the volume, you can see that there's way more brightness in this image now.
Shutter speed is the next setting that we're going to be talking about. This is the confusing fraction one. The shutter speed is the amount of time that your shutter is open. For the amount of time that your shutter is open, light is going to be coming into your camera. So if you leave your shutter open for a long time, you're going to let a lot of light into your camera. And if you leave your shutter open for a short amount of time, you're not going to let as much light into your camera. So basically, a fast shutter speed, where the shutter's going like that, is not going to let in much light, thus making your photographs darker. A slow shutter speed, where your camera is going like that, is going to let in more light, thus making your photos brighter. So you could think about it like floodgates. Floodgates being open for 1 second are going to let in a lot more water than floodgates being open for 1/10 of a second. Basically, when you look at those fractions, it's telling you that the shutter is going to be open for a fraction of a second. So 100th of a second, 1,000th of a second, 2,000th of a second. Just think about it like this. The higher the number is on the bottom, the quicker the shutter is going to close. The quicker the shutter closes, the less light is going to be let into your picture. So I'm going to take this shot at 1/15th of a second, or 1/15.
Letting light in for a 15th of a second is giving a nice exposure or brightness to this photo.
I'm going to take this shot at 160th of a second, or 1/160.
Letting light in for 160th of a second, or 1/160, is making the picture a lot darker, because if you remember, the bottom number has increased from 15 to 160, so this means that the image is now darker.
Aperture is the last setting we're going to be going through. Aperture for me is the most creative and fun setting to play around with. It's a little bit confusing because if you have a low aperture number, so like f4 is actually brighter than f16. Just think about it like this.
At a low aperture, the hole in your lens is wide open, just like Pac-Man's mouth. This is letting in a lot of light, and just like Pac-Man when he has his mouth wide open, he can't see as much, just as your lens can't see as much when it's wide open with a low aperture. Then at f22, a much higher f number, your lens is a lot more closed, or Pac-Man's mouth is a lot more closed, and this is letting a lot less light in. But it also means that Pac-Man can see a lot more, or your lens can see a lot more.
I'm going to take a shot at f4, so that's with the mouth wide open.
For now, I don't want you to worry too much about what I was saying about Pac-Man not being able to see very well. Let's just concentrate on the fact that a lot more light has been let into this shot, and it's making it a lot brighter. I'm going to come on to the not seeing much later on, so don't worry about that.
And now I'm going to take a shot at f11 with the mouth more closed, or the lens more closed.
At f11, Pac-Man's mouth is much more closed, so the lens is a lot more closed and it's letting a lot less light in, and you can see the result here of the image not being as bright, it's a lot darker.
So low f numbers like 4 or 5 are brighter than high f numbers like 16 and 22. Something like f4 is brighter than f16. So you're probably wondering, why would you have 3 settings that just control brightness when you could just control one and control the brightness of your image with that one setting. Each setting actually has a different effect on your pictures, and the key to being successful in shooting manual is using those effects to make your pictures look the way that you want to look. Let's go back to ISO. Back to that volume knob setting of ISO. I've set my ISO or volume to 320 for this shot.
So you can see at a lower ISO, like 320, there's not that much grain in the image. Now what I mean by that, if we zoom in, you can see that the image isn't that grainy. The lower you go, so a lot of people don't like to have grain in their image, so they'll try and shoot at like ISO 100, which is the darkest one. That's turning the volume knob right the way down. And if you turn it up, you'll get a lot more grain. Now I want you to remember what this looks like, and then when I show you the next image, compare it and you'll see exactly what I mean.
And now I'm going to adjust my other settings just so the exposure's the same, but you can see the difference of the ISO. So I've adjusted my other settings just to show you the effect of ISO on a picture. I've turned my ISO up for this shot to 6400. So the previous one was at 320, this one's at 6400.
Because I've turned the volume up in this shot with the ISO, the image is a lot brighter. Therefore, to compensate for that, I've had to make my shutter faster. So remember the floodgates? I've let less light in with the floodgates, and I've also used Aperture. So I've closed Pac-Man's mouth to let less light in, which means that the photograph is still going to be the same brightness as the one with the lower ISO. Now, this is because when you do this, you can create an effect on your picture with ISO. So when I zoom in, you can see that there's a lot more grain in this image than there was in the previous one. So if you remember, I was telling you about the previous image, to take a mental note, if you compare the two of them, this one has got a lot more grain in it. So with all of that grain, that's an effect that you can choose to have or not have. That's completely down to your own discretion, but it's something that you can achieve using ISO.
So why would you bother using shutter speed? Let me show you in this funny little video I'm going to do.
When you're trying to capture something like a fast moving object, it's going to be blurred if the shutter is open for the amount of time that the object or whatever you're trying to photograph is moving. In this case, it's me running, and if you're trying to capture someone running, you need a reasonably fast shutter speed. So let me show you what happens when you have a slow shutter speed. Some of this might have actually happened to you already. So you can see in this image that I'm just a big blurred mess, and that's because the shutter speed was too low. It wasn't fast enough. The floodgates were open for too long of a time, and now you can see that you just don't get anything sharp that's fast moving in the image. You can see that the trees are still sharp, but I'm not sharp because I was moving too quick through the frame. Don't worry, I'm going to show you how you can correct this. Let's try and take a shot of someone running at a faster shutter speed, and then we can see the difference, and you can see why it's much better to use a faster shutter speed in certain circumstances, so your floodgates aren't going to be open for as long. You can see in this image that the subject is frozen in time, frozen in action. I was using 1/2000th of a second, which is a really quick shutter speed to capture the person frozen in time. Now, you don't just use shutter speed for people running. You can use it for like birds, you can use it for cars, like literally anything that's fast moving, you will need to have a fast shutter speed for. And for those of you that are a bit ahead of the game, I am aware that you can also use them for long exposures, and I will be posting a video about that. But just for now, know that with your shutter speed, using it to get something that's fast moving is the most important thing for you to concentrate on right now, just so you don't get blurry images.
Let's talk about Aperture. Aperture can have a really cool effect on your pictures. Do you remember I was talking about Pac-Man not being able to see as much when he's got his mouth open? Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to take this shot with the lens open, or Pac-Man's mouth open.
With the lens open, or Pac-Man's mouth open, you can't see as much in the image because the background's blurred, and that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about Pac-Man's mouth or the lens being wide open. Basically, the depth of field is much more shallow, so you can see in this image that the pine cone is sharp but the background is blurred, and this is a great effect that you can put on lots of different images in using lots of different ways to draw attention to certain things. Obviously, you know, lots of people use it for like portraits of people, that kind of thing. There's loads and loads and loads of great uses for low aperture, but just remember that when you open your lens or you open Pac-Man's mouth, you are going to let a lot more light in, so you're going to have to use your ISO and shutter speed to compensate for that.
And now I'm going to take this shot with Pac-Man's mouth closed or with the lens closed.
You can see in this image that everything's much more sharp, there's no blurred background, and that's because I've turned the aperture up to f22. So Pac-Man's mouth or the lens is now closed and the depth of field is much greater. So when your depth of field is greater, much more things are going to be in focus. Now, obviously, like I've been telling you, I've changed the shutter speed to let more light in, and I've also turned the volume up to let more light in, so I've turned the ISO up, just so that with Pac-Man's mouth being closed, there's less light coming in from the lens, so you have to change the other settings in order to get the exposure or the brightness correct. The more you get to know these three settings and use them all balanced out, the quicker you're going to get better photos. So if you were getting some shots with a nice brightness, but you were shooting them at a high ISO, you could use either aperture or shutter speed to increase the brightness of the image and then lower your ISO to get rid of the grain in that image. If you were shooting something that you wanted a low depth of field in, the mouth open, and the image was too bright, you could change the ISO or the shutter speed. Say if you were shooting something and it was moving fast and you had to put a fast shutter speed on, and then you saw that the image was dark, you could use aperture or ISO to compensate for that. Do you see where I'm kind of going here with this? Like I said, it's all about balancing these three elements out in order to create the effects on the images that you want to make. You will learn all of this much quicker actually going out and taking photographs yourself. And if you are struggling to use your camera in full manual mode, then it will have a shutter priority or an aperture priority mode. You can set this on your camera in different ways, and if you just Google whatever camera make you've got and shutter priority or aperture priority, it will tell you how to put that onto your particular camera. Then you can just concentrate on controlling the aperture or the shutter speed and really start to understand that particular setting. And then the more that you do that, the easier it's going to be to go into full manual, because you're already going to understand at least one of the settings in there. Like I said before, go out, try all of these things, then come back and watch the video again and it'll all start to sink in for you. Learning these three settings is a massive step to becoming a professional photographer and just making your pictures look amazing in general. Learn to speak the language of your camera and it's going to pay off big time for you. Thank you for watching the video. If you've got any questions, then be sure to comment below. And if you enjoyed it, then give us a like and subscribe. Thank you.